18,000 feet down, the USS Indianapolis rests in eternal darkness. July 30th, 1945. Two Japanese torpedoes struck her starboard bow. The first impact point, metal torn like paper by the explosion. The torpedo blew through 16 feet of reinforced steel plating. Inside the forward compartment, complete devastation from the blast wave. Shattered bulkheads reveal the force that ripped her open. The second torpedo struck 30 feet aft, sealing her fate. Blast patterns show the warhead detonated against the fuel tanks. The ship's bridge, where Captain McVeigh made his final stand. The helm frozen at hard starboard during her final moments. The engine order telegraph still reads, "Full speed ahead." Navigation charts dissolved decades ago. Only the brass instruments remain, the captain's quarters, his personal effects scattered by the sinking. A brass clock stopped at 12:14 the moment she went under. The forward gun turret collapsed into the debris field. 5-inch naval guns, silent guardians of a forgotten battle. Ammunition storage, shells scattered like fallen soldiers across the deck. The radio room where the final distress call was never sent. Communication equipment corroded beyond recognition after 8 decades. The wardroom where officers took their final meal together. Silverware scattered across the deck, oxidized black by seawater. Ceramic plates, cracked and broken, strewn among the wreckage. The galley kitchen, where meals fed 1,200 men. Copper cookware turned green with verdigris over the decades. The mess deck where sailors gathered, now silent and empty. Metal trays and cups fused together by rust and time. The ship's safe, blown open during the sinking's violence. Whatever valuables it held are long scattered across the abyss. The sick bay where wounded sailors received their final care. Medical instruments rusted and scattered among broken glass vials. The engine room, a cathedral of corroded machinery. Steam turbines that once powered her at 33 knots. Pressure gauges frozen at critical levels from the flooding. Valve wheels seized permanently by decades of corrosion. The boiler room where seawater rushed in with terrible force. Boilers ruptured and collapsed under the ocean's crushing pressure. Coal remnants scattered like black snow across the deck. The crew quarters where 800 men once slept. Metal bed frames collapsed into rusted tangles of wire. Personal lockers torn open and emptied by the sinking. The armory where rifles and sidearms were stored. Rifles corroded into unrecognizable shapes by salt water. Ammunition boxes rusted shut and buried in sediment. The torpedo room now filled with the weapons that destroyed her. Launch tubes, forever empty after firing their final salvo. The anchor chain, still attached to her rusted bow. Each link weighs 200 pounds, frozen in place. The anchor itself, buried deep in the ocean floor. The forward observation post, crushed by water pressure. Binoculars still mounted. Lenses long since shattered. The flag locker where the colors were stored. The ship's bell, covered in marine life but still recognizable. Nameplate inscription barely visible beneath decades of encrustations. The damage control station, abandoned in the chaos. Fire hoses, petrified and useless after 80 years. Emergency breathing apparatus corroded beyond any use. The chart room where her final course was plotted. Brass dividers and rulers scattered across the rusted deck. The chronometer stopped at the exact moment of sinking. The executive officer's cabin, personal effects long dissolved. A corroded mirror frame, the glass long since dissolved. The ship's library, where knowledge turned to sediment. Empty shelves where hundreds of volumes once stood. The recreation room, where sailors played cards and wrote letters. Metal chairs, frozen in their final positions by corrosion. The barber shop where haircuts cost 50 cents. Scissors and razors rusted into unrecognizable lumps of metal. The laundry room, washing machines collapsed into rust. Copper pipes oxidized green and bursting from corrosion. The carpenter's shop, tools scattered in the darkness. Hammers and saws, their wooden handles long dissolved. The machine shop where repairs were made at sea. A lathe, frozen mid-operation for 8 decades. The electrical room, wiring exposed and corroded. Copper wiring turned green and brittle by seawater. The generator room, silent after powering her final voyage. Generators that once lit every compartment now dark forever. The refrigeration unit where food was kept for the crew. Cooling coils, burst and twisted by decades of pressure. The storage hold filled with sediment and debris. Metal crates, contents long since dissolved or scattered. The paint locker, cans rusted and burst open. The rope locker, where only metal fittings remain. Bronze fittings, oxidized green but still recognizable. The chain locker, massive links piled in darkness. Chains fused together by rust into a solid mass. The ventilation system, ducts collapsed and scattered. Air vents, crushed flat by the ocean's pressure. The water distillation plant, pipes burst and corroded. Tanks that once provided fresh water, now filled with seawater. The steering gear compartment, mechanisms frozen in place. Rudder chains, locked in their final position forever. The propeller shaft, still connected to her massive screws. Bronze propellers, each blade larger than a man. The rudder, bent from impact with the ocean floor. The stern section separated from the main hull. The break point reveals the violence of her sinking. The fantail deck where depth charges once sat ready. Depth charge racks, empty and corroded beyond recognition. The stern flagstaff, bent but still standing. The aftergun platform, weapons long since collapsed. Anti-aircraft guns, barrels pointing uselessly at the darkness. Spent shell casings scattered across the deck like brass snow. The lookout platform where sharks were first spotted. Binocular mounts, lenses shattered and frames corroded. The signal lamp, once used for ship-to-ship communication. The life raft stations, davits empty and rusted. Life preservers dissolved decades ago, only metal rings remain. The ship's plaque, commemorating her commissioning in 1932. Bronze letters, green with age but still legible. The crew memorial area where names were once displayed. The hull number CA-35, barely visible beneath the rust. The waterline, marked by a distinct change in corrosion. The porthole row, glass long since imploded from pressure. Brass porthole frames, oxidized green but structurally intact. The forward mast collapsed across the deck. Radar equipment, crushed and unrecognizable after decades. The crow's nest, where lookouts scanned for enemy ships. Signal flags long dissolved, only the halyards remain. The ammunition hoist, frozen in its track. Shell hoists that once fed the guns every few seconds. The powder magazine, empty and silent. Brass powder casings, scattered and corroded green. The fire control director, instruments corroded beyond repair. Optical rangefinders, lenses shattered and frames twisted. The plotting room where targets were calculated and tracked. Mechanical calculators, frozen mid-computation for eternity. The combat information center, nerve center of the ship. Status boards where the battle was monitored, now blank. Communication headsets, corroded and tangled in their cables. The cryptography room where secret messages were decoded. Cipher machines, mechanisms seized by decades of corrosion. The meteorology station where weather was tracked. Barometers and thermometers, glass broken and mercury long dispersed. The ship's log room where history was recorded daily. Filing cabinets rusted shut with their secrets sealed inside. The intelligence office where enemy movements were analyzed. Map tables where Pacific operations were planned. The damage assessment station, never knowing its own fate. Ship diagrams, metal plates corroded but outlines still visible. The auxiliary control room, backup systems now useless. Emergency lighting fixtures, dark for 8 decades. The telephone switchboard, lines cut forever. Brass jacks and plugs, oxidized green in their sockets. The brig where sailors served their punishments. Cell bars, rusted but still standing after all these years. The ship's dentist office, instruments scattered in darkness. Dental tools, stainless steel now pitted and corroded. The cobbler's shop where boots were repaired. Metal shoe lasts, the only remnants of the cobbler's trade. The tailor shop where uniforms were mended. Sewing machines, only the metal frames survive. The ship's store where sailors bought personal items. A cash register, drawer open and empty. The photography lab where reconnaissance images were developed. Chemical bottles shattered and contents long dispersed. The print shop where orders and notices were produced. Metal-type blocks, scattered like alphabet soup across the deck. The final resting place of 879 souls. The debris field stretches for miles across the ocean floor. Each piece tells the story of her violent end. A war grave protected by international maritime law. The USS Indianapolis found but never forgotten. Her story lives on in the depths, a testament to sacrifice.